Hello, I'm Ian Scales. You're watching TelecomTV, and joining me today is Boudewijn, who is the chairman of the Payment Systems Committee at the EBF. Gus, welcome to TelecomTV. I'd like to ask you a bit about the way that the payments area has developed over the past few years. A few years back at TelecomTV, we did a survey in which we asked our readers and viewers what they thought was happening in that market, what we call the mobile payments market at the time. Did they think that Google and Apple were going to take everything over, or did they think that the banks would eventually sort of strike back and things would settle down as normal? They thought the banks would strike back and things would settle down as normal. And I know you're from the banks, but I wonder what you think in terms of how things have changed over the past few years. And are we sort of in this same old zero-sum game of winners and losers, or have we moved on from that to become more of an ecosystem in this area, where people find their slot and do their thing and cooperate with each other?
Well, there's a couple of questions there. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but in retrospect, I believe we've come from, if you look at the incumbents and fintech and big tech, they were all going to disrupt banks as we knew them. I think we've come as a basic trend from disruption to cooperation. To a cooperation model, and we now use the term ecosystems. We thought it was black or white, but now we know that there's enough for everybody if you have the right ecosystem. So winner takes all strategies. Probably some still strive for world domination, and some are more successful in that than others. But it's more nuanced, and it always plays out a little bit differently than one thinks. Because of innovation, the new things arrive, there's regulation, there's consumer behavior, and of course nobody has a crystal ball to really predict what's going to be the case 4 years from now, for instance. So it's always good to sort of have a nuance and not go for a very too black and white thing. And consumer behavior is one of my basic things. I always say consumer behavior is extremely slow to change. We've done some research. I mean, technological change, it's a phenomenal pace of change, but the consumer is slower to change. So it always takes longer than what is technically possible, I would say.
Yes. And from that perspective, though, do you think, I suppose learning from them is the wrong thing, but what I've noticed over the years is that in the 1980s, we used to talk about disruption a lot. Things would come along and disrupt the existing order. What's happened over the past decade and more is that big companies, or incumbents, if you like, have learned how to channel disruption and turn it to their own uses. Do you think you've learnt a lot? And I'm thinking particularly in terms of engagement with customers and, the customer experience, as we say in this business. Have banks learnt a lot from those who would potentially disrupt them, do you think?
Yes, I believe that, especially after the crisis. If you look back long enough, you see things happening after the crisis, especially payments were a very resilient part of the business. Innovation really started there, I believe. There was an appreciation of innovation in payments, for instance. Then you got regulation, the first payment service directive in the Netherlands. You see the fintech, the big tech companies coming up. And I believe that the revised payment service directive, PSD2 as we call it, has been a massive wake-up call. It will enter into force coming January, but we have seen it coming for a couple of years. And I think banks have really taken it as a massive wake-up call that they must adapt, they must innovate, and I think they've learned a lot from the big tech and also from the fintech. So from the big tech, they learn you have to have a perfect user experience. You have to have service that customers love, and they have learned from the fintech how to do that, to work more agile, etc. They're not all successful there, but there's been a massive learning process, I would say. They're not all going to make it, of course, and I truly believe that PSD2 has been the wake-up call. Further down the line, we will see open banking, artificial intelligence, platform banking, and so on and so forth. So the pace of change will increase. Absolutely. So don't ask me where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years.
I am going to ask you.
Yes, you are.
But thinking about that, I'd press you a little bit more about what you might have learned from it. I mean, one of the things that you might have learned is that my discussions here have led me to believe that banks are very much focused on on products, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, bringing
the
out
customer centricity thing.
Well,
this is the single biggest learning, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, is that an example of customer centricity? Is products, or is the idea of engagement more important than the products flow on? Do you think
I think I was trying to say something similar. That banks were thinking products and pushing products and not really understanding if those were the products that suited the needs of the consumers, of the customers. So put the customer first and foremost and try to provide perfect services. I think that's what they've learned from the likes of Amazon, for instance.
Yes, which is an example of disruption being turned around, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I personally believe that some have underestimated indeed the capacity of the incumbents, the banks, to reinvent themselves. One of the leading bankers in my country said, "We have to disrupt ourselves before we are disrupted." I think here in London a couple of years ago, and this is really to the extent that banks have sort of internalized this fact, this realization, they will probably be successful for some time to come. But banks that do not have that realization, they will have a hard time.
Techno-optimism, which I'm calling it, says that every device that's out there, all these IoT devices and so on, could be turned into a payment system or be an endpoint of a payment system. And it will probably will become so. In terms of prudence, shouldn't we be thinking about security, consumer protection and even antitrust more about this? So that, you know, you might need regulation to try and limit the number of devices that are able to do transactions, or at the very least regulate them very tightly so that they behave themselves.
I'm not sure if very tight regulation is the right answer. Let's first try to understand what we're talking about here. And I think we have to really look at the matter. For instance, a question is, do devices need some own legal status, yes or no? Or are we just saying, no, that's not necessary. You have physical persons, you have legal persons, and the only trick you need to do is how can you connect all these devices in terms of liability to one of the existing, the physical person or the legal entity that's liable for the behavior of all these things, and how can they communicate securely. And I believe we had a presentation on that this morning from MasterCard. I believe tokenization there is the key.
So now that question again, which was the toughie, I suppose. What will the payments landscape look like in between 5 and 10 years' time?
Well, I think platformization in many shapes or forms will be the name of the game. Banks opening up, being open being an open platforms with APIs, selling services from other financial services companies, and not only just their own brand. The question will be how many of these banks will be able to have the right scale to become a platform. Not just any small bank has the right scale or reach to become a platform, I would say. So. On the other hand, the big techs will they really enter the financial services market? Probably they will, if there's money to be made, and it's all about the data, of course. And so, to the extent that you need to be a platform to get hold of the data, to get better products and services, you have to become a platform as a bank. If you cut out of the data equation, you will lose.
Yeah. Gus, thank you very much. That's very interesting.
Okay.